Whoops. Um, Perfect. Hold on, Alex. We got you going.
Oh, hey, Alex, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing quite well. Hey, thanks for joining me and getting on so quickly.
Of course.
Uh, and did you have a good time away? It seems like your break was good.
It was good.
Yeah,
We were joined by a newborn this
yeah,
summer. So, we've made the most by not sleeping at all.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that's been a fun addition.
Yeah, exactly. And came back at the perfect time. Um, well, let me introduce and Alex. How do you pronounce the last name? I always want to make sure I get it right. Just
Maisler.
perfect. That's
Maisler.
Alexandra Maisler, and she is the in charge and the founder of Thinking Caps, which is a wonderful tutoring service and educational service. And she's worked with us over the years, and we just thought it would be nice to have a conversation about this new academic world we all find ourselves in, and the idea of maybe some tools that we can use while we're helping our kids with hybrid and distance learning. So, if I could just let you jump right into it, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say right off the bat, and we're all kind of anxiously waiting to hear any pearls you might have to help with this type of learning.
Of course. And thank you for having me. I know we talked earlier this summer about learning over the summer. And as we enter into this new season, I'm excited to be back
Hmm.
and to think about how we can support families. As you mentioned, my group and I, we work with kids in nursery through really even college, helping them thrive in the academic setting. And we also help parents manage the process.
Hmm.
And that is certainly going to look very different this year. And we're thinking a lot about how to do two things: how to make sure that kids are actually learning this year. How do we use this very unusual time to create learning experiences for kids rather than just trying to take school and bring it home? But
Hmm.
we're also trying to think about how to make this manageable because parents are still going to work and the course still has to get taught and we still have to get through the responsibility aspect of learning. And so thinking about all of these things has been, I know, overwhelming to some people, but it's also been exciting because we can think critically about how to tackle this fall in a way that will be meaningful for kids and, again, manageable for families. So
Hmm.
that's what we've spent the summer doing. And when we thought about kind of where to start. We were thinking about these big ideas of project-based learning and, teaching skills that we might not otherwise be teaching in school. But then we took a step back and we said, hold on, what is like the first thing that we need to do? And we thought that the first thing that we should talk about, and we have been talking about it with families a lot, is to think about the organization of the school year and the organization of time and the organization of home.
Hmm.
I know it sounds really basic, but before we get into like all of the what's the classroom going to look like and all of again the big questions, I thought it was important to just talk about again how do we organize our space and how do we organize our time, because we are all going to be spending some time at home, some time learning, some time working, and for many families. Just the setting, and for many kids, the setting of where they're doing work is really, really
Yep.
important.
Yep.
And so, again, it sounds like a small thing, but I think thinking about where can kids learn? Is it a particular area of the home that can be dedicated to learning? If that's not possible, is it a cubby or a basket that the student keeps all of their supplies and that can go from place to place? But I think that if kids have a place either that is stationary or that gets moved around, that can be kind of like their work zone. That's a really, really helpful place to start. The other thing that I think is important to talk about as we head into the school year is organizing time. So once we've organized our space and thought about where we will actually do the work, is to put together some schedules. Here's a schedule for when you're learning at home, and here's a schedule for when you will be going into school. And sitting down together as a family and putting that schedule together and writing it out, putting it on the refrigerator or maybe in some sort of central location. But if a student knows that I'm on a Zoom classroom at 1 o'clock and I'm having lunch at noon, it will orient them to the school day. There are inherent structures when kids are in school. They move from class to class, or they're having different activities in the class. There's some rituals around that. And those, I think, will be broken down when kids are at school. So helping them create that schedule and weaving that schedule with whatever is going on at home is a really, really great place to start.
One thing I might add to that is I think for maybe 3rd and 4th grade all the way up through high school, that's a great description of how people should organize their home and time, where the older kids can maybe do it a little bit more. Maybe for the younger set, it might be helpful to have kind of a visual kind of schedule for the day, so they can see what's going to happen, in the same that the older kids could read what's going to happen.
Exactly. And if you are in a hybrid or even in a remote model, and you are working on some skills with your younger learners, I know I have a 5.5-year-old, and I have a 3.5-year-old, and I have a baby. So actually, with my 2 older ones, we sit down and we talk about the schedule. And I use the opportunity to talk about the schedule with my son, to actually have him write. So he's learning how to write. We're working on spelling, and he actually puts together the schedule. And I always recommend for parents to have a conversation around scheduling, even with really little kids. So we talk about, what are the things we need to do today? We need to eat lunch. We need to read our book. We need to have dinner. We need to take a bath. We need to work on our math, whatever it might be. And then what are the things we want to do? So, there's always playing, there's maybe calling grandma, whatever are those things that kids might want to put into the schedule so they have ownership. And like you said, for younger students, you could have a visual flow for the day. For somebody who's in early elementary school, having them write out the schedule is a really great way to So there are opportunities for skills to actually be worked on as you're working on the time management component.
Yeah.
And obviously for older students, it's definitely having them plan that out and knowing when are they working, when are they meeting maybe with teachers or classmates, when are they taking breaks, and then what are other things that need to be happening in the family. The other important thing is, since we are home and we're doing a lot around the house, also involving kids in the things that need to happen, from the little guys to the older guys. So if lunch needs to be made because there's no cafeteria, because the cafeteria is the kitchen, putting that on the schedule and having lunch prep or maybe cleanup be part of the day, because all of those are learning moments. And again, when we think about how do we use this unusual school year to infuse it with learning experiences, we want to think about all of the many skills that go into a kid's enrichment, and something like putting lunch together is actually a really important skill. Why not work on it while we're all home together?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. One other thing, just to go back to the beginning of what you were saying, just to jump onto the idea of kids having a specific place. We always suggest that you keep it outside of the bedroom, so that's just a separate area as well. So just to add to that.
Yeah, if possible. Look, I think in an ideal situation, you will have a place in your home, or maybe 2 places, because it can get kind of tough to sit in one spot all day. But I think that, yes, a place where you have limited distractions, there's not a ton going on, you're not near a bed that's comfy and you can kind of plop in, but also a place, again, that your child has some voice in setting up. So, do they want, if the possibility is there, can they pick out the color of their desk, or can they pick out the color of the seat cushion? So having them participate in that process, and as you are setting up a space with your child, to also make sure it's not, like I said earlier, not just one spot, because for little kids, what I've been hearing is that, if they're on a Zoom for 45 minutes, that's a very long time for an elementary school kiddo. It's even a long time for a middle school student. If they're sitting in one spot for 45 minutes and then they're expected to do more work after that, for them to sit in one place for an hour and a half, that is exhausting. And so think about, again, where can they maybe do reading that's different than where they're doing their Zoom calls. If you think about the classroom, kids aren't sitting down for an entire day in one spot. So again, as much as possible, have them moving around and having them work in different places so they just don't get exhausted in that chair.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great piece of advice. Yeah. Oh, this is wonderful. I'll let you continue, and I'll just kind of feed off of your input.
Yeah. So the other thought that I've been having, we talked about organization and we talked about time management. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about is the sustainability of the school year. We've all been talking about schools reopening, right? So school is reopening. How's that going to look? I think a lot of parents have started talking to their kids about what the school day might look like, the extra steps at drop-off, which you obviously know all about the health considerations and making sure students know about that. But once we're in school, hopefully we will be in school, and some kids are already in school. I think that there will be things that come up. There will be moments where we have to be really flexible. And one of the things I'm already hearing is that this is not sustainable. And so one of the questions that we've been thinking about is how do we help families make this year with whatever will come up be a sustainable experience? Because again, when kids are in school, there are so many experiences that they're having. They are having the social experiences, they're having a math class, they're having an English class, there's math, there's music, there's so many things that go into a rich school day. And I think this year, not all of that is going to happen, right? We're not going to be able to have the wealth of school experiences that we normally do. And in order to make this year sustainable, I think what we need to focus on is what are your sort of goals for your family? What are your goals for your child? And what are your goals for the family for this academic year? And make that your anchor. Maybe even write it down, sort of like the school mantra for the year. Maybe it's about working on executive functioning and study skills. Maybe that's something that has always been a weak area and you want to work on that with your child, with the teachers, as a family. Maybe math has been really tricky and you want to dedicate a little extra time to math. Maybe it's the social component of school that's really important. So what is sort of the anchor for this school year? And write that down. Make sure everybody knows that's kind of the goal of the year, is to work on those core skills or those core subjects, and build from there. And so if you have a month where things are completely different and you have to restructure your whole day, or you have to restructure your whole week, you still know that the most important thing that you're trying to achieve for your child is, again, maybe that executive functioning component. And so that is where your attention and energy goes. And if there's a little bit less math or a little bit less art than normal, it's okay, kind of giving yourself a reasonable bar, but knowing that there are anchors and things that you really want to make sure that you work on and accomplish over the course of the year, so that you still can have a meaningful experience. So I think that piece is really, really important. And I'd love to, I know that I'm sure you have some thoughts in terms of kind of helping families transitioning with the health guidelines. And I think that's really important to talk about when we talk about the sustainability of this year.
Yeah, it's from the health standpoint, it's one of those situations where I think the most important thing is that we're able to adapt quickly. Right now, the prevalence is so low that if the schools are able to pull it off in a successful way, it's just going to be important that everyone realizes if numbers do start to go up, there may be adjustments that just have to happen. So everyone's going to have to be flexible and realize that changes might come quickly. But other than that, it's just following the guidelines as much as you can from the government and from the schools.
Sure, and I think that actually reinforces how we've been thinking about it in terms of things are in one state now, and we don't know what they will look like.
Yeah.
And so for families to know and for kids to know that, I think flexibility is going to be the name of the game. And so how do we stay flexible while not losing sight of the learning? And again, I think the best way to do that is to create those anchors so that you know what you're working on this year, and if other things are not possible to tackle, then it's okay, because you have the things that are really important for your child and for your family as well.
Now, this is, as a parent, this is, I'm wondering, is there something different in terms of the parent's role when kids are learning at home? I mean, I always feel like I'm going to be doing a lot more in the educational realm just because the kids are home all day. I'm just trying to get a sense of the relationship between a parent to a student during distance learning, if it's different in your mind.
That's a great question. Like, I think that the biggest and most important recommendation we make, which as a parent is also kind of hard, is to think about the places where you can give your kids some space, and obviously in an age-appropriate way. But I think that will become even harder when kids are learning at home. And so what I mean by that is, nowadays there's so much access to teachers. There are portals where parents know all of the homework that is expected to be handed in. Anything that's missed, we know about that in almost real time. And it's really easy as a parent to jump in and say, oh my gosh, you didn't do this, or your teacher is sending this message, or a test came back. Let's talk about this test right away. And what that takes away from kids is the ability to own their own learning, to have ownership in that process, to make a mistake and not feel good about it, and think through, how do I deal with it? I am not handing my assignment in on time. I need to go beg my teacher to give me an extension. To maybe have left studying until the last minute, wake up feeling really, really tired, and realize that doesn't feel good. When, as parents, we jump in, we take those learning moments away from kids. And of course, we want our kids to be successful. We don't want them to have a painful learning experience. So a lot of times we jump in and say, let me help you with this. Let me, this seems like you might need, let me help you with flashcards. Let's email your teacher. So you go in to help. But in those moments, I would recommend for parents to take a pause and give your child an opportunity to maybe have a small failure, have that opportunity to think through how to fix it, and then have the opportunity to learn from it. And I think that when we're in this hybrid or remote learning model, when we're all here, two things will happen. First of all, you're going to see that your child should be on a Zoom and they're not on a Zoom, or you're going to see that your child is not taking a break, and you are going to want to jump in and say, hey, now would be a really good time to take a break. I would recommend taking a beat and having your child have the space to reach those conclusions. Where I think parents can be really helpful is with the sort of basic stuff, like make sure there's snacks and make sure that there's a really good lunch and a really good breakfast. I think that we underestimate how much we I know talk a lot about sleep hygiene, which is obviously important, but we all sometimes underestimate how important it is to fuel young brains. And I think that in a school day, again, there's a set time for lunch, there's a set time for snack. It's a part of the ritual of school. Make sure that those things are set up. Make sure that your child has access to healthy, filling food, because I have seen kids go from one mood to a very different mood if they just haven't eaten. But otherwise, I would say create the scaffolding, create the space for them to work, create the schedules so that they can navigate the day as a whole from home, and give them those moments so that they can take a break and eat. But otherwise, take that step back, let them figure it out a little bit, and just remind them that you are there if they have a question. You're there if they want to talk something through, but take a breath before you jump in. That's
good advice. Yeah. Now, is there I hear so many different responses from different families, but do you as an educator see any advantages or disadvantages of distance learning versus in-class learning?
That's a great question. We had a very interesting experience last spring where we all just had to experience distance learning.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started, everybody was very, very nervous. And in many ways, the experience was not very productive. But I actually had a number of students that really benefited from distance learning.
Yeah, yeah.
And those were the kids who the pressure of the school setting is such that it doesn't allow them to function in the most successful way. So some of those kids have attentional vulnerabilities, and we thought, well, without structure of school, they're really going to struggle. And in fact, some of those kids had a really productive experience because they didn't have the pressure of this is how my school day needs to look. They had the flexibility to create some structure for themselves. Some kids who were maybe having some social challenges at school, having a little bit of space between other people and peers and knowing that they're in their home space for learning was really, really productive. So I think for a number of kids, the remote learning was actually a very good experience. However, for a lot of kids, it wasn't. For kids who need accountability, for kids who need the structure, not having that. And that's why I started by saying, think about how to create structure, because that is something that comes inherently in a school day. And when kids don't have that, it's really challenging for them. So if you know that your kid thrives in structure and does well because they have those periods, or they have the math teacher and the English teacher, and in the absence of that, it's going to be hard. Create that structure for them. Of course, kids also had trouble who thrive in social experiences, and not having that was really difficult. I hope that this fall we are in a much better place, and so even if kids are not physically in school every day as they are hopefully one day again, there are opportunities for them to be social. So again, I think that those are the big places where we saw that kids really had a hard time. Is the kids who needed that structure, or the kids who needed the access to consistent social interaction. But I think we've learned from last spring in the ways to help them. So pluses and minuses.
I just want to answer this question quickly, then I want to follow up on that question. Someone was asking just about hours of sleep for a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. I typically say once you get to the teenage years, you're looking at about 8 hours of sleep. And once you're in that preteen, it's usually about 10 hours of sleep. And for the younger kids, it's 11. But those are guidelines to go by. But more important than anything is how awake and active your child seems during the daytime. But those are general recommendations. One other thing, there's so much online time with distance learning. Is there a way that you feel, and is there an importance to creating a balance in terms of the educational day between the amount of time you're online versus reading you might be doing from a book, or writing you might be doing off a computer? Or do you feel like just do it all on the computer?
That's another great question. And it's actually something that I feel strongly about, because I think there's a ton of research that tells us that we need, especially for younger learners, they need the tactile experience to really learn. And so when they're just sitting and taking in information, it's only coming in one way. It's on a screen and they're sitting. So for young learners, but really for kids of all ages, I think it's incredibly important for them to get up and move as they're learning, for them to be able to take a pencil and to write things down. And as we have moved forward with all of the various remote learning options, there's more and more technology that is helping connect the video experience with the tactile. But it doesn't need to be fancy. For every single class that the student is in, even if they are taking notes on a computer, I always recommend having a notebook and having the student write down some key points. If they can't write down the points as they're in the class, or if they are typing, it's still really good to have some aspect of the learning have a manipulative component to it. So if you're doing math, set your child up with something that they can actually sort, something that when they're adding, it's not just numbers on a screen, or it's not just images on a screen, but have them physically move around cans, or have them have beans that they can move around. Again, there's a lot of fancy things that you can buy online but it doesn't need to be fancy. Use the home. Color coding their materials, having notebooks so that they can maybe file some papers away. It really helps them with those executive functioning skills, but it also helps them connect what they're learning in a more active way. So if they cannot physically go into the classroom and have a classroom space, that's okay, as long as they are having moments where they can move things around, physically take notes, and not just have everything be in the computer, because when we have the tangible piece, it creates those pathways for learning that they can then take online more successfully.
Interesting, yeah. And similarly, kind of for the older kids, a lot of times they're on the computer and then their phone's right next to them and they're checking their phones, or when they get a break, they're watching YouTube videos. I mean, it's so hard these days because the social interaction is through technology also. But I would think sometimes those breaks should be movement breaks, or breaks that are different from a video related break.
Absolutely, and it's hard to get teens and tweens to think about that, but it's actually something we talk about all the time. And one way to help students think about a healthy break is to actually talk to them about it, because a lot of times we'll say, "You need a break. Get up," but get really specific. Can you say get up and do 5 frog jumps if you got a little kid? For your older child, can they independently take a walk around the block? There's always vacuuming, so whatever it is, but be really explicit that there should be some sort of movement involved in their day, and it should be not a one-time a day thing, but it should be at intervals. And we actually, we think about it all the time, because when we're creating schedules, we very explicitly put in breaks, but we talk about what a good break is. And we actually worked with another small business in New York City, a fitness a fitness coach for actually kids with special needs, and he shared some tips for us for ways that kids can have movement breaks. So it's really important, and I absolutely encourage families to think about that, but think about what are actual things that kids can do. And it can be fun, and do it as a family. Do a 5-minute stretch break, put on a yoga video, get creative, but absolutely it should be a component of everybody's school day, whether you're a little learner or all the way through college.
Yeah. Now, any other advice that you might have, maybe not specific to distance learning, but you would tell us any year, COVID or no COVID?
COVID or no COVID. I think the most important thing is just worry less about the worksheets and the getting through the textbook, and focus on the skills for your child at their level. And what I mean by that is, for early learners, for the nursery school kids, elementary school kids, think about ways that they can focus on social emotional learning, because that is the most important thing that they can be learning and soaking up when they're little. And that might come from school, but it could come at home. When you're playing a board game, you're taking turns. If you are getting lunch and your child has to wait, that's okay. Those are the kinds of skills that we want to be thinking about as we're creating school days, whether kids are at home or actually in school. For middle schoolers, of course, math facts are important, and multiplication is important, and reading is important. But for middle schoolers, the executive functioning skills are probably the most important things that they can really gain in those middle years. And so fostering those is vital. So we talked about organization and time management, note-taking skills. All of those are way more important, because those will carry them into high school. And if you have a high schooler at home, I think that for them to focus on assessing how they're learning, what they're learning, and knowing when they need help, and then how to ask for help and advocating for themselves. Those are the skills that will allow them to be successful in high school, but certainly are really important for college. So regardless of whether your kid is in school or out of school or in this hybrid model, if there are worksheets that are coming home and you guys are fighting over them and they're not serving your child well, I think don't worry about every assignment that's coming home and worry more about those core skills at those different ages, and putting those at the forefront of what you're doing. And I think you'll be in good shape.
It's kind of like, I hate to, is it maybe a far-fetched analogy, but it kind of goes back to the time when you're introducing solid foods. And if you're so focused on getting the food in the mouth, you lose sight of teaching kids how to be happy and healthy eaters. It's the kind of that same idea. If you're focused on just the score on the worksheet, you lose sight of creating a happy and healthy learner. So
No,
that's kind of what I think about it.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. One other question we did get is someone had asked about leisure screen time after school, considering that kids are on screens all day. I mean, not just what I would say to that is I don't like to give a specific time, because I think, again, you lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish. Screens are important these days. They serve a purpose because it's a way that you actually can actively communicate with friends. But rather than pick a specific amount of time, what I think the important thing to do is to talk to your kids about balance in the day and how you get different things from different things that you do. And then you can kind of create a sense of time that kids might be on the screen for leisure time, and let them try to be in control of that time, with the idea that you're less concerned about how much time they're on the screen and more concerned with the idea that they have balance, which might mean exercise or reading or some other solitary activity that's not on the screen, in conjunction with having the social time that screens are now providing in the new world we find ourselves in. So I think that's
absolutely. And also, yeah, and the quality of that time.
Exactly.
If you are talking with a really good friend or with a grandparent, that's going to be a very different experience than, slogging away at math worksheets. And so, yes, it's still a screen and you're still interacting via that screen, but it will be very different for your child. And so as long as there's sort of a qualitative consideration, I think with the balance and having time that they're off and having time that they're moving, and then having time when the screen's off, maybe at lunch it's totally off and it's an opportunity for them to not have the screen on. Or conversely, if lunch is when they would hang out with their friend and so they're eating lunch with a friend on Zoom, that's okay as long as it's balanced and as long as there's quality to how they're spending that time.
And even within the leisure time, I think it's important, and it's good to use these words as active time versus passive time. So active would be you're engaging in a Zoom meeting with your friends, or maybe you are playing a video game, but you're doing it with your friends in a way where you're problem solving together, versus passive leisure time, which might just be looking at YouTube videos or playing a video game by yourself. So when you talk to your kids, even within the leisure time, you might want to distinguish between active and passive leisure time. So I think that's a good distinction. Just a couple of last questions I have for you. The first one is, are there resources online that you just find to really be helpful for kids as adjuncts to what they're learning in school?
That's a great question. So there are a ton of resources, and one of the things that I think is hard is to actually navigate everything that's out there. And what I have recommended is pick something. It doesn't have to be, perfect. There's a lot out there, and stop there, because sorting through everything is impossible. But once you've found a resource, if it's working for you, if it's working for your child, don't worry about finding other resources. But I have a couple of favorites, that we use for things like movement. I actually really love Cosmic Kids Yoga, and I'm not affiliated with anything that I'm about to mention now, but I think they're great. If you just need to get up and release some energy and release some of the tightness in the shoulder, but also spend time with kids and get them moving, that's a really wonderful resource. Khan Academy Kids for younger students, and then Khan Academy for middle and high school students is a tremendous resource library of content, really for anything that kids encounter. And there are interactive components, there are videos, there are worksheets. So really, just about anything that kids are learning, there's supplemental material there. So those are kind of the academic piece, and then the movement piece. Those are my go-tos because, again, there's a ton out there. But if I do nothing but use those two resources, then I find that I'm in good shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I would just say two other things I would mention. One is there's an emotional aspect to everything that's going on. And we were talking to Dr. Jeannie Goodman last week, and she talked about kind of validating kids' feelings. So rather than actively trying to keep kids from experiencing certain feelings, which ultimately they may be challenges that are good challenges to deal with those feelings, it's probably good just to check in a way where you're more listening and validating what they're feeling as this whole educational process goes on. So I think having that thought of being there to listen rather than to help them necessarily avoid things that might be challenging is an important role for a parent. And then the second thing I would just mention is if you can, just try to get creative. If kids seem like there's monotony to what's going on, try to find a way to make the learning creative and fun, just to intersperse special things in there or surprises that the kids might not be expecting. It works beautifully if you have the continuity of a schedule, but you also have the occasional surprise that just keeps things fresh and keeps that schedule vibrant. So that's just what I would add to what you've been saying, which I think has been wonderful.
Yeah, I think that, yes, schedules are important and keeps everybody sane, but having a little spice is great. And we had in our family over the summer, we still had a schedule, and it allowed us to do what we needed to do to function. But we had, one day on Fridays that we would have field trips. It was our field trip Fridays.
Right. And
field trips didn't need to be big. They could just be outside. They could be to the ramp that we don't usually go to and ride our scooters down that ramp. But we would have these field trip Fridays, and sometimes we would talk about what we would do. Sometimes it would be a surprise. But it doesn't have to be a big activity, but something that is a ritual that kids can get excited about, but also give them a little bit of a diversity to an experience if they are kind of having a hybrid school where every Monday is one thing and then Tuesday, Wednesday is the other. Because again, when they're in school, they have those moments where they're in the yard and they have a conversation or an experience with a kid, or if you're older and you have that conversation with a teacher and it makes you think things differently when you're at home and there's fewer people, it can get a little boring. It can get a little stale. So having that little bit of variability definitely keeps it fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, so thanks so much for all your time today. That was really helpful for me as a parent, and I hope that a lot of folks get to see this, and I'll try to share it with everybody in our practice. But I wish you the best. Yeah.
Thank you, and to a successful and peaceful year for all of our kids.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions, just reach out to me or Alex at Thinking Caps. What's the contact information that would be best?
So you can reach we have a website, thinkingcapsgroup.com, and there are some contact links there. We put out tips on our Facebook group and on our Instagram, and if there are particular questions that come in, just send us an email. We're in the community, we're a resource. We've been fielding lots of questions. It helps us think about ways that we can support families, so be in touch.
Excellent. All right, Alex. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, John.
Bye.